Hello and welcome to History by Hollywood, a podcast series that examines the real events and people behind fact-based movies. This is episode 70.3, The Social Network Part 3, for Sunday the 1st of March 2020. So I'm just going to interrupt the introduction to bring some sad, although not unexpected news. And that is on February the 24th, so barely a week ago, we saw the death of Katherine Johnson, aged 101. Katherine was a remarkable lady. She was an African-American lady born in August 2018, showed real mathematical genius and went to work for NACA, which was the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, and would go on to become NASA. For anyone who's seen the film Hidden Figures, and if you haven't, you so owe it to yourself. It is a brilliant film. It just shows the battles that she went through, both as a woman and as an African American in Virginia during segregation, and the work she did, which was truly remarkable, leading to President Barack Obama awarding her the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And NASA's research facility is named in her honor. She was married twice, and we meet in the movie her second husband, Jim Johnson, who was a United States Army officer, a veteran of the Korean War, also African American. They were married for 60 years until Jim's death last year in March, and then Katherine following him, as we said, barely a week ago. Truly remarkable lady, and the movie is so worth watching. So is just reading about her. A real trailblazer. Mom, we salute you. And now back to the intro for Social Network Part 3. To recap, we ended last week with a scene where Mark Zuckerberg is honest enough to tell the Winklevoss's lawyer that he's not paying the full attention to what the lawyer has to say. So we're going to play that clip again and we'll lead on from there. So without further ado, here we go.
Let me rephrase this. You sent my client 16 emails. In the first 15, you didn't raise any concerns.
Is that a question?
In the 16th email, you raised concerns about the site's functionality. Were you leading them on for 6 weeks?
No.
Then why didn't you raise any of these concerns before?
It's raining.
I'm sorry?
It just started raining.
Mr. Zuckerberg, do I have your full attention?
No.
Do you think I deserve it?
What?
Do you think I deserve your full attention?
I had to swear an oath before we began this deposition, and I don't want to perjure myself, so I have a legal obligation to say no.
Okay, no. You don't think I deserve your attention?
I think if your clients want to sit on my shoulders and call themselves tall, they have a right to give it a try, but there's no requirement that I enjoy sitting here listening to people lie. You have part of my attention. You have the minimum amount. The rest of my attention is back at the offices of Facebook, where my colleagues and I are doing things that no one in this room, including and especially your clients, are intellectually or creatively capable of doing. Did I adequately answer your condescending question?
So there we go. He's basically openly contemptuous, dismissive, and, you know, he just says, like, I don't want to perjure myself, so no, I don't think you deserve my attention. And I don't know who played the lawyer, I should have looked it up, but he reminded me of Alan Alda and that kind of smiling, slight disbelief. You don't. Okay. Then we go back to flashback, and Eduardo and Mark are going out with the two girls from the lecture and end up getting lucky in the gents' toilet, and Eduardo grins afterwards going, "Dude, we've got groupies." Zuckerberg, however, sees Erica, his girlfriend from the opening scene, and tries to build bridges with her, but she reminds him that he called her a bitch, laughed at her brass eyes, then talked about comparing girls to farm animals, so she dismisses him. The reality is the girl scene is fiction, as by this stage Mark Zuckerberg was dating his future wife Priscilla Chan. Erica remains a fictitious character. But it's sort of, I suppose it shows that as you were saying earlier, the beginnings of, or possibly the already existing transition of nerdishness into coolness, the melding of the two. I think I'm actually misusing the word meld there, but the combining of you can be a nerd and be cool.
Right.
I mean, Huey Lewis and the News told us it's hip to be square, but I don't think anyone believed them.
Definitely not back then.
And one thing that I hadn't realised initially, and this comes out in the next scene where Zuckerberg says, look, we need to expand into Yale, Columbia and Stanford. This was very much based around Harvard and Ivy League universities. And the Winklevosses, their whole thing was you only get in if you've got a Harvard email address, which is, and so it is this, well, we'll come on to it in a minute, but this phrase, the sex appeal of exclusivity. So in the movie, when at the hearings, everyone's at lunch except Zuckerberg, he's tapping away on a laptop and he's approached by Marilyn Delpy, played by Rashid Jones, a second-year associate at the law firm, and she's admiring of his work, says he must hate the Winklevosses. And he says, I don't hate anyone. He comes up with this lovely play on Latin where he describes them together rather than Winklevosses, he calls them the Winklevi. And he says, they're not suing me for intellectual property theft, but because for the first time in their lives, things didn't work out the way they'd wanted. So in flashback, again, we see the Winklevi and Narendra learning that Facebook is expanding, and they're talking about what they can do, and they realise Zuckerberg might be in contravention of the Harvard law or Harvard Code of Conduct for Students. So even though that's only a couple of brief scenes, there's quite a lot to unwrap. First of all, Marilyn Delpy, the second-year associate law firm, she's another fictional character, but she's used as a vehicle to explain and move the narrative. The intention at this stage for him was still to make a social network exclusively for undergraduates at some of America's most prestigious universities. And the movie doesn't make clear that at one point, or at which point, he decided to open the Facebook up to the world in general. But it must have been during the period covered by the movie due to the numbers of members mentioned. And later on we'll see that it spread internationally. Yeah, it's quite hard to tell at what stage they went, hey, let's just open this up to, the hoi polloi.
It was actually, as far as I know, I think it was in 2006, they stopped going just college to college, university campus to university campus, and I think the international thing came actually after opening up to the general public. It wasn't like they forced their way into international markets, but rather just let it happen. Because by then it had already been fairly well known.
Yeah, because the scene that we see, we realise it's gone international, is where the Winklevi are competing in the Henley Regatta in the UK, and they hear about it, obviously, which makes them seethe. But it's a guy whose daughter is at Cambridge or Oxford, so I did wonder, did they try and spread it to other, very prestigious universities first? Like it might have gone to Heidelberg and the Sorbonne, in Paris or and Oxbridge, or was that just the spread? So in a strange sort of parallel, it's almost mirroring the original internet, which was, Tim Berners-Lee saw it as a way of universities communicating together globally, and then it spread to the general population. It's almost the same route where they realise, wow, this is big, but it could be so much bigger. But
exactly,
they lose that exclusivity.
Well, they still kept it to some degree because, again, actually no, nowadays you could just join. You still have to be invited for a long time. I remember that I was like, oh, that's actually really interesting. Like, it guarantees that it's a real person, not some bot,
That's true. Actually, that's very true.
Whereas nowadays you can actually just sign up for Facebook.
And we all have friends requests from people who have no other friends, and you're like, right. Okay,
exactly.
Hello, computer thing. Yeah. Oh, and it's always a photograph. If it's sent to a guy, it's always a photograph of a very pretty girl. If it's a girl, I assume it's a handsome guy. And do they really think you're going to go, wow, I could be their only friend?
As any spammer will tell you, all it takes is one or two out of the million attempts to get what they need.
Yeah, that's the great shame, isn't it? Okay, so back to the movie. Now this is where you're really going to come into your own, because we now meet Sean Parker, played by the infuriatingly talented Justin Timberlake. I'm just going to make a little aside here. Okay, so this guy, he's a child star. He's in the Mickey Mouse Club alongside Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera, who are also ridiculously talented. And then he joins a boy band, and they're just ghastly by my musical taste. And then he goes solo, and he's done one or two songs that I quite like, but generally it's not really my thing. And then he goes into acting. I'm like, yeah, right, let's see how you do here. Oh, God, it's really good. And he is, and it's just...
He's a good comedian, yeah.
Yeah. And he comes across really well, and he doesn't, and he's doing that Leonardo DiCaprio or Michael J. Fox thing. And I know there's some tragic irony with Michael J. Fox because he's got Parkinson's disease now, but you know, he could be playing teenagers when he's 40. He's got that, he just doesn't seem to age. So anyway, Sean Parker comes in and we meet him. He wakes up with a girl he'd only met the night before. He can't remember her name. She asks which college he attends to learn. He didn't, and he's an entrepreneur. But he did invent Napster, which many of us will remember. It was a free music download site. And she says, wow, are you a zillionaire? He says, no, I'm broke and I'm being sued by everyone who's ever attended the Grammys. Using his lady friend's laptop, he sees that she's got Facebook open and he doesn't know what it is, so he's interested. Then we jump back to Harvard. The Winklevi are being shown in to see the president, and they tell the president of Harvard that they believe Zuckerberg has breached the Harvard student handbook. And we've got a very funny little clip.
Students are required to respect public and private ownership, and instances of theft, misappropriation,
And
Yes, sir.
punch me in the face. Go ahead.
or unauthorized use will result in disciplinary action, including the requirement to withdraw from the college.
You memorize that instead of doing what?
What my brother and I came here today to ask of you, respectfully,
Sir.
of course, is it's against university rules to steal from another student.
I don't see this as a university issue.
Of course this is a university issue. There's a code of ethics and an honor code, and he violated them
You
both.
enter into a code of ethics with the university, not with each other.
I'm sorry, President Summers, but what you just said makes no sense to me at all.
I'm devastated by that.
What my brother means is, if Mark Zuckerberg walked into our dorm room and stole our computer, that would be a university
I
issue.
really don't know. This office doesn't handle petty larceny.
This isn't petty larceny. This idea is potentially worth millions of dollars.
Millions?
Yes.
You might just be letting your imaginations run away with you.
Sir, I honestly don't think you're in any position to make that call.
I was the U.S. Treasury Secretary. I'm in some position to make that call.
What?
Harvard undergraduates believe that inventing a job is better than finding a job. So I'll suggest again that the two of you come up with a new project.
I'm sorry, sir, but that's not the point.
Please, arrive at the point.
You don't have to be an intellectual property expert to understand the difference between right and wrong.
And you're saying that I don't.
Of course I'm not saying that, sir. I'm saying that.
Really?
Sir,
And how did they get this appointment?
Colleagues of their father.
Let me tell you something, Mr. Winklevoss. Mr. Winklevoss, since you're on the subject of right and wrong, this action, this meeting, the two of you being here, is wrong. It's not worthy of Harvard. It's not what Harvard saw in you. You don't get special treatment. Is there anything else I can do for you?
So I think my favourite bit in that is where they say, sir, you're not qualified to decide if this could make millions or not. He said, I was the General Secretary of the Treasury in the United States government. I think I have some experience. Whereas actually, of course, reality has shown us that he was wrong. If we're looking at the real world, but of course he's not. He's looking at the closeted cocoon of Harvard. But yeah, and he basically puts them down. But we'll come back to the reality of that in a moment, because we jump back to the Savrin hearing and hear that Eduardo and Mark fly to New York seeking to raise funds. But we see one meeting where Eduardo's working really hard to try and promote Facebook, and Mark just sits there clicking his tongue quite annoyingly. And then the next meeting is with Sean Parker. Eduardo Savrin seems very wary, but Mark's keen. And Christy Lee, Eduardo's girlfriend, she's also along. And we hear about Parker's background, how Napster was bankrupted because no one wanted to listen to a 20-year-old telling them how things are. Then Parker asks about Facebook. He learns they now have 75,000 members. And Savrin tries to sell the monetizing idea, whereas he wants to put advertising on. Mark's been resisting, and they ask Parker to adjudicate or to give his opinion. And again, we've got a clip.
Hey, you know what? Settle an argument for us. I say it's time to start making money from the Facebook, but Mark doesn't want to advertise you. Who's right?
Neither of you yet. The Facebook is cool. That's what it's got going for it.
Yeah.
You don't want to ruin it with ads because ads aren't cool.
Exactly.
It's like you're throwing the greatest party on campus and someone saying it's got to be over by 11.
That's exactly right.
You don't even know what the thing is yet. Exactly. How big it can get, how far it can go. This is no time to take your chips down. $1 million isn't cool. You know what's cool?
You? $1 billion. That shut everybody up.
And that's where you're headed. $1 billion valuation. Unless you take bad advice, in which case you may as well have come up with a chain of very successful yogurt shops. When you go fishing, you can catch a lot of fish, or you can catch big fish. You ever walk into a guy's den and see a picture of him standing next to 14 trout?
No, he's holding a 3,000-pound marlin.
Yep.
That's a good analogy.
Okay.
I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm just a fan who came to say hi.
He owned Mark after that dinner. He picked up the check, he told Mark they'd talk again soon, and he was gone. But not before he made his biggest contribution to the company.
Drop the. Just Facebook. It's cleaner.
So it's a little bit back and forth where it goes silent and the background music disappears. We're jumping forward to the future with Eduardo describing the scene. And he says, after that meeting, Parker owned Zuckerberg, telling him he had to move to California. Three main things to wrap up there. Sean Parker, he clearly, I mean, he was the creator of Napster.
Well, that's the thing. He wasn't. He actually wasn't.
Right.
Napster was actually created by a guy named Sean Fanning, and Sean Parker was the guy who helped kind of promote it. They both of them, I think Sean came up with the original idea, and then Sean Fanning, sorry, because they're both it's spelled differently. Sean Fanning is SHAWN.
Right.
Sean Parker is SEA. So Sean Fanning came up with the idea, but they knew each other. They were on the East Coast. They were, I believe, Sean's uncle was a bigwig, like money-wise, and had some connections in the Silicon Valley, connected them with a bunch of people. They went out to the Silicon Valley, and Napster was a huge, success, but not commercially, because obviously not only did they not know how to monetize it, but they also got sued. So not only did they weren't making any money, they were actually, having huge losses by one of the most powerful lobbies in the world, right? Like the music industry back then was still massive.
Yeah, I read something, I can't remember which, it wasn't for this show, but I do remember coming, what we were looking for, and it was about the origins of a lot of things we use day to day, particularly on the interweb, and as Google Earth was a tool designed for the military, and it's one of the reasons that the Bosnian War ended was Bill Clinton's administration were able to show Slobodan Milosevic, fly him up a 3D valley saying, this is where you've got this unit, that unit, and basically say, look, we've got you wrapped up and you're going to lose this war if you don't stop now. So equally, Shazam, which is this tool loads of us have used, and I've got on my phone, where you just listen to a few seconds of music and it will tell you the artist and the song. I believe that was a tool developed by the music industry to immediately identify breach of copyright.
Exactly. That's what it was used for a decade before it became something the public could use.
Do you remember G-Man Brad said, what's good is they don't go off down rabbit holes.
Oops.
Yeah, sorry about that one. Right.
It could get much worse.
Yeah, it could be.
The portrayal of Sean Parker as this kind of playboy right from the start is actually kind of nebulous. In reality, I know there was a lot of kind of this party culture, but everything I've heard, the company that I worked at that had some connections to these guys did work hard and party hard kind of style. But it's kind of interesting how he's almost the opposite of the Zuckerberg character, who's super nerdy and just focused on the code. He doesn't care about money or anything like that. There is that connection of the being sexy, whatever, the sex appeal thing. Yeah. But I think they probably blew up the Sean Parker Playboy thing a bit to give you that kind of dynamic between the two. I don't think he's really quite that much of a playboy, but he is definitely extremely business savvy. And this is why I wanted to mention the thing that he was not an inventor of Napster. He was just a guy who realized the potential of it. And just like he did it with Facebook and, as a VC with other firms, he's just really good at having the nose to kind of pick up this is a potentially huge idea and I'm going to make it happen. And then he goes and actually knows he has all the connections now that he got through the Napster.
Yeah.
The history of Napster is basically like, they were the first, right? They were the first ones to do streaming, for example. They had a lot of firsts. They built a lot of connections in the Silicon Valley, and he was able to tap those by the time Zuckerberg arrived.
And I think this is the thing about tech firms, that it seems different from that old business thing of you need a businessman to run a business, and he doesn't have to be technically savvy in what that business does because he'll understand market forces, supply and demand, cost of manufacture versus returns and all that sort of thing. Whereas with tech firms, you think about Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, they are technical experts first and foremost, who then somehow combine that with I think what I'm trying to get at is would it be fair to say that Sean Parker is like the frontman, the spokesman for an NFL team? He can't play football himself, or he probably can a bit, but he doesn't. He's not a player, but he's that very affable, photogenic, good clubbable guy, as they used to call it. The guy that you'd want to go for a pint with, who can put the message across very effectively. Is that more his role?
Yes, totally. Except it's not for the public consumption. It's for these boardrooms.
Right. Right.
And actually, those kinds of people are unbelievably valued. They're rare. They're really rare. So Sean Parker was the smooth talker who had the connections, and I think that to make him kind of like an anti-hero, they had to make him more of a playboy than he probably really was.
Yeah, because I think if you associate in the movie with Eduardo Saverin as the closest thing we've got to everyman, someone with whom we can empathise, then definitely his nemesis portrayed in the movie is Sean Parker. On the Harvard president thing, the real Winklevoss brothers say, we did see the president, but we didn't pull any strings. There was no family connection or anything like that. We just went to student office hours like any other student would do, and we waited patiently for quite some time, and then we got to see him. They do suggest that he didn't really have much comfort for them. And it does appear that Sean Parker did have an input beyond being a simple investor in a name, and he would go on to become the first president of Facebook, because he said, and I've not been able to confirm, but certainly no one's denied that it was his idea to drop "the" from the Facebook. And I think he made a really good point of ads are not cool. Like, you listen to your favourite podcast. Let's use, bless him, he's always used as the example, but the Mike Duncan History of Rome podcast. And I remember binge listening to catch up when I first discovered it. And then he got to a stage, he said, look, I've been approached by, because of the audience reach on advertising, what do you guys think? And then he started doing this thing, and it started off, it was always 30 seconds. And now on Revolutions, it's like a minute or a minute and a half. But my phone has a jump forward 30 seconds button, so I'm afraid I hope I'm not undermining Mike's income, because I know he's one of the very, very few who actually makes a living out of his podcasting now, of course, his books. But I just skip the adverts. I don't want to listen to Harry's razors or how comfortable a certain mattress is or something. So
really,
so he doesn't have at the beginning. Dan Carlin tends to do them at the end, if he does them at all, and it's normally for Audible. So we go to the next scenes, and we're back in the hearing where Eduardo Saverin has been asked by Zuckerberg's lawyer if he ever did anything that could have led to dismissal, and he says no. And the lawyer says he was accused of animal cruelty, and it turns out that he had, as part of his initiation into the Phoenix Club fraternity, he'd had to carry and take care of a chicken for a week, a live chicken. He'd been at lunch with Zuckerberg in the canteen, and he needed to feed the chicken, so he gave it bits of his lunch, which was cooked chicken. So the story made the Crimson, the in-house newspaper at Harvard, that, he basically forced this chicken into cannibalism and it was cruelty to animals. Back in flashback, Zuckerberg reveals that they did need more money to rent a house and pay a couple of interns, and the house is in California. Safran's immediately antagonistic about Sean Parker and his growing influence on Zuckerberg, but is told to get on board. And we now hear that Facebook, as it is now has over 100,000 users. Next, Zuckerberg is hosting a competition to recruit interns. He has a group of hackers writing code or trying to break code or something, and then they have to take shots of strong drink in between every 30 seconds or 5 minutes, whatever it is. He identifies a winner and welcomes him to Facebook. Eduardo's there and he's quite amused by this, but he hands him details of a new account he's opened with $18,000 for the company's use. To wrap that up, the Phoenix Club initiation and the chicken thing did run in the Crimson, but I've not been able to find anything that the story was planted there, because the movie's going to go on to suggest that it might be Mark Zuckerberg who planted the story about the chicken and Eduardo, because he was angry that Eduardo had got into the Phoenix Club. I think that's a fabrication on the part of the movie or the book, or possibly Eduardo to explain why he feels he was turned against. I don't know. You went to a university in America. Did you have these fraternity and sorority clubs?
Absolutely. And I know very little about the insides because I abhorred them. So I was with the others, with the common folk. I always found those things scary, cultish, But there's a whole kind of subculture of the initiation, the hazing, that was actually a really big problem in the U.S. I don't know if it was also international. I mean, international. It's so unfair to say that when I'm talking to a Brit living in Qatar, but
yeah.
We actually had people die, and because the initiation kept getting more and more outlandish, people had to swim through electrocuted water and all sorts of crazy, stupid shit, or drink, liters of vodka through a funnel. I mean, things that the human body was not meant to do.
No,
so there was a big crackdown, I think, in the early 2000s. That
it's a bit like Jackass, where they had to keep upping the stakes to be shocking. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
And there's always this idea that the next generation have got it easy compared to what we did, so we've got to make it tougher because they're not as strong as. I mean, I've heard army recruits that I taught the year before saying, well, it's not the same as when I went through, and I'm thinking, dude, I can measure that time in months, and this has always happened. I've often quoted this. There's a statement written by a politician, and he's saying, we fight and strive to create a better world for our children, then we resent them because they didn't have the struggles that we had. But but there is a degree that we only have ourselves to blame because we spoiled them and everything's easy. And that was a Roman senator in 250 BC. So I think the older generation complaining about how easy the younger generation have got it, and it's thanks to our efforts you've got all this stuff, and you're not grateful. This is possibly why there's been such a virulent backlash especially from white middle-aged males against the Greta Thunberg sort of thing of you've betrayed our planet. And it's like, okay, I'd like to think she's aiming that purely at the decision makers and the policy makers in government, because girl, we weren't aware. I didn't know what I was doing when I was driving a car or lighting a barbecue. Definitely one of those sort of backlash things. And I think this hole's so deep now, it's not so much a rabbit hole as a mine shaft. So we need to drag ourselves.
No, because I need to jump into here and say, because this is something that, I'm a software engineer, so when I watch it, just like you're a helicopter pilot, when you watch a movie that has helicopter pilots in it, you will point out every single thing that is totally not realistic, right?
Yeah.
And you'll talk about auto rotation, distances that it's actually viable, and all that kind of stuff. So I have a really short temper when it comes to watching movies where programmers are portrayed, because it's always like somebody's banging on the keyboard and it's drinking shots like in this thing, or being told to work like by Sean Parker, turn around, get back to work. Like what Zuckerberg said about the film, I think was really a good point. It's like it's slow, it's boring, but there is this creative excitement. You're creating something. The most interesting thing in this movie actually is that the code that they show, it was written for this movie. They actually didn't want to just, most movies will steal code from, some website. They'll grab some JavaScript off some website and just stick it in because no one's going to know the difference. You're going to see it for a split second. But people like me will actually look at it and go like, that's bullshit. That is not breaking into the mothership in Independence Day. That's like a cookie counter,
Right.
Whereas the film actually had people sit down and write code. There's a really good blog called Movie Code. It's a Tumblr blog. I'll actually send you a link. Maybe you should put it in the notes, where they examine every piece of code that ever appears in any movie and show the actual source. And for this one, I of course looked it up. They said it was actually written and then they showed out examples where it is very realistic, which I have to say is really impressive that they went through that kind of length.
Wow, that's really, really impressive. I love it when people go to that much trouble.
I love it. I know.
Just for a bit of realism, knowing that there will be people like yourself, software engineers who understand this stuff, who'll freeze it, look at it, run it, and see what it does. Yeah, and I did think for a moment there you were going to reference Dunkirk and the gliding Spitfire that glides for several hours.
Oh, right.
And
right.
just, sorry, we can go through the lift equation and you'll see that there's a reducing velocity, therefore there's a reducing lift, therefore the aircraft's descending. Anyway, yeah, the chicken thing, we don't know. We don't know if that's real or not. But yeah, the fraternity thing, it's strange. In a way, it almost feels like the American universities, who've taken most of their traditions from British universities from the original inception. You've got Cambridge in Massachusetts, obviously named for the university town where I grew up. I'm not aware that British universities have male and female gender only clubs, or have done for decade. But the hazing thing is not a phrase I've ever heard in connection with anything other than American universities or military colleges.
Right.
And I'm very aware that it became a really serious problem.
And it actually also got transplanted to business for a while. There was this idea that, like, especially in startups, you'd take the new person out, you'd get him completely trashed, put shackles on him and send him loose in San Francisco, Never happened to me.
It's very
Totally
military. It's existed in military since time began, but it has a very, very clearly defined purpose. Is you push someone to breaking point to judge how far you can rely on them. Will they still be in the trench beside you, or have they thrown their weapons and armor away and run? It's like, has such a purpose, which means that. But I don't understand, why do you need that at a university? And it's just an expression of elitism.
That's what it is.
Without anything to be elitist about. You've already proved that by getting into the university. I like to think I'd have been like you, and I'd have been, do you know what? I'll have my group of friends, and if we want to socialise together, we'll choose to. But I don't want to be in a group that selects based on sporting prowess or intellect, or worse,
or family
name, where you grew up, or worse, race or religion, or
exactly.
Culture. Like they've got the Jewish only club now. It's difficult, isn't it? Is that so we can share with like-minded because we're a persecuted minority, or is it it's because we don't like anyone else?
Exactly. I think minorities do get a pass to some degree, especially in the U.S. But yeah, in the end, it's just a cult, as far as I'm concerned. It has the same purpose,
I do think that we're probably going to go down dozens, and we're going to have an entire rabbit warren when we do the People versus Larry Flint.
Oh man.
Christina has come up with some absolutely blinding suggestions, and she always gives a reason. and she's up in the northwest, I think. There's something about the West Coast that seems to be really, I don't know, slightly more radical, and that's such a generalisation. Anyway, we really are. I mean, we're going to. These episodes are going to be running us up into the summer before we get to Denial or anything else. Andrew sat there rubbing his hands with glee, going, "Hey, I've got a few extra weeks to get all this work done." Because bless him, he has just moved like 1,200 miles. It's 2,000 kilometres. He's moved. Just to a Brit, the idea of moving and still being inside the same country is just ridiculous. But yeah, you guys are used to it as well. Anyway,
Yep.
back
in
the movie, and just for those who've lost the plot completely, we were doing the Social Network. Back in the movie, Saverin says he invested $18,000 for the move to California, despite his misgivings. Because his lawyer says to him, you know, if you had all these misgivings, why did you open this account and invest $18,000 of your own money, or money that he'd raised? We're not quite sure. And he says, I wanted to be a team player. He was going to New York to try and generate advertising interest, and adds, well, what could possibly go wrong in 3 months? Then we cut to the California house. It's got its own pool where Zuckerberg and the team are horsing around. They've run a zip wire from the chimney to the pool, but the chimney collapses, shortly after which the doorbell rings, and surprise, surprise, it's Sean Parker and a pretty girl who just happened to live across the street. Parker learns that Eduardo Saverin has got an internship in New York and didn't come out with the rest of the team, and he looks a little bit gleeful at this news. At a nightclub, Parker is egging on Zuckerberg, saying, look, the business community will be scared of you, but you've got to push your chances, and Eduardo Saverin should be with you here, not kissing Wall Street's butt. So, it is worth reminding people at this stage, Eduardo Saverin was the main source of information for Ben Mesrich's book, on which the movie is based, and therefore it's kind of unsurprising that neither book nor movie make mention of the fact that Eduardo, whilst he was in New York, was actually using Facebook to advertise for free for other startups in which he was involved, which is a little bit cheeky, really.
Yeah.
The suggestion being that it just appeared on there, and Mark Zuckerberg was ringing up going, what's this? And he said, oh, it's just something I put on. So he obviously had some kind of access to upload content. So this isn't revenue-raising advertising at this stage, as far as I can understand, but it's just him putting his own links, maybe, or stuff on for other startup companies. So Eduardo's obviously being entrepreneurial, and the idea you get is he's supposedly the business side rather than the tech side, which makes you wonder, how did he and Mark Zuckerberg meet?
I believe he was studying computer science and then switched to business or something.
Ah, right.
Yep.
This move to California, which until I started researching, which is where we came up with the whole thing about William Shotley and the Silicon Valley. You were saying, you know, Sean Parker and the startup of Napster, they moved to the Valley from the East Coast. It clearly is. This is a magnet for any kind of tech company. So when he says you've got to move to California, it's not because it's Sunshine State and you get oranges all year round and all this. It's because that's where the Valley. So when you guys in the past have referred to the Valley, I've thought, I don't know which valley. Maybe there's really good biking routes down there or something. So you're referring to this. Is it Santa Clara Valley? Is it the official name?
You know, I don't know. We call it the peninsula. We call it the valley. It's weird. Everybody knows what they're talking about when you say it, like the physical region, Bay Area.
And I do now, but only because I looked into it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny how people within an industry will assume that the rest of the world are aware of the details of their industry.
Oh, dude, that is especially bad here. We have like the most. Our bubble is like, I don't know, 10 meters in width, you know.
But it does affect the world. It's just sometimes the world doesn't care about the background to what they're using. Yeah. So back in the movie, we jump to Henley-on-Thames in the UK, and there's a rowing competition. It's a famous annual rowing competition amongst sort of elitist. You know, this is a thing you see at the Olympics with the 8-man and 4-man scull and all this. And the Winklevi are rowing 8s representing Harvard, and as a Brit, I'm delighted to report that they lose. At drinks afterwards, they're with Divya, when a British man they meet, and this is what we referred to earlier, he says, "Oh, my daughter's been telling me about the race. She's just watched it on her computer on something called Facebook." They look stunned and say, "Is she at university in the States?" He says, No, she's at Cambridge. And so Facebook, we learn, has gone international. The twins and Divya finally agree to sue Mark Zuckerberg. Meanwhile, in California, despite the party atmosphere in the Facebook house, there are a lot of laptops being worked on by a fair few coders. Sean Parker's there, and when he answers a knock at the door, out of the pouring rain, we see a stunned Eduardo Saverin arrive, clearly unaware that Parker had joined the team officially. Zuckerberg appears as Parker and Saverin spar with each other. Saverin's nose is out of joint because Parker has been setting up business deals, so he and Zuckerberg go for a private chat. Zuckerberg asks Saverin to move out to California because that's where it's at. Saverin says he's been busting his gut around New York trying to get deals. And Zuckerberg says, "Yeah, how's that working out?" Next we see Eduardo call and cancel a business account. So just to wrap that up, the Winklevi attending or racing in UK did happen because they attended Oxford University, I think probably for 1 year. And they rode in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race 1 year. And I remember this happening. Having grown up in Cambridge, it's got no connection to me as a resident in Cambridge. These are university students. The university boat race is the most over-covered, elitist, exclusive, means nothing in the real world race I've ever heard of. But it still gets BBC coverage. It's one of the 8 sporting events that are not allowed to go subscription only on satellite or cable. But they did race in the Oxford-Cambridge boat race. And Oxford at this stage had started bringing, in some cases, professional, often American rowers internationally. They'd bring them in for a few months on a study course, which meant they were attending the university, which meant they were allowed to row. So everyone in Cambridge went, "Oh, that's disgraceful and unsporting," and then immediately started doing the same. But the year the Winklevi were there, I'm delighted to report again, they lost. Cambridge won by 1 1/3 lengths. Boom. You know, people want to know the relative values of the two universities, just look at the Romans. Cambridge got a bridge, hence the bridge over the River Cam. Oxford only got a ford. You could just wade through the River Ox. So obviously Cambridge is more highly valued. And there you go. Slam dunk. End of story. Case closed. Thank you, my lad.
Well done.
Meanwhile, back to the movie. G-Man Brad must be sat there thinking, I've written a review and they are deliberately getting rid of all the things I said was good and doing all the things I said I was glad they didn't do, because we are rabbit holing like a rabbit going down a hole. Oh dear. Yeah, as we said, rabbit holes, diving down. Sorry, G-Man Brad. And that's all we've got time for this week. But I can assure you that it will all be wrapped up and concluded next week as we listen to The Social Network Part 4. So thank you very much for your kind attention. And I know this has turned into a bit of a monster episode, but it really is one of those films that generates really interesting points for thought and discussion. So although we are going to keep repeating this through all 4 episodes, if you haven't seen it, you owe it to yourself to watch this movie. You don't have to care about Facebook. It's just got some really interesting things to say about the world in which we currently live. So thank you very much, and we will be back next week.